Now, everybody should have got a message saying that we're recording, yeah? And you'll see a little red dot as well in the corner of your screen. Okay, everyone, welcome to this Sentient Rights Ireland session on Zoom, a monthly event. And we have a special one today because our special guest is Wendy McGovern, who has been a vegan activist for, I don't know, I think when Wendy went vegan, they were putting out leaflets on Slate, I think. I'm not quite sure, but so Wendy, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll have a lively Q&A at the end. So everybody hold their comments until then, please. So Wendy, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming here as well. It's lovely to see loads of different names that I recognise, some that I don't, but I really appreciate you being here and no pressure whatsoever. All these brilliant people in here. But what I'd love for this as well, because I've kept my talk quite short because I thought this would just be a way of like starting the conversation, and I think the conversation will be the most interesting thing especially with the people who are here. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But as some of you will know here, I've been an activist for a long time. I've been a vegan for 26 plus years and an activist even longer than that. I got into the movement through grassroots activism, through anti-vivisection. But more recently, I have set up and run a Thrive Vegan World podcast and also co-host the Animal Rights Show with Nella and Roger here, and previous co-panelists here, Jeremy and Brad as well. So and guests as well. There are a few people who've been guests on there. So yeah, that's my kind of current activism. But I'm really honoured and humbled to be asked to do this talk. So thank you, Dennis with one N. I really appreciate that. And when I was invited to do the talk, I was thinking about the things that I feel strongly about and the things that I believe are important to the movement. And so I kept coming back to these two words, respect and justice. And so then I got thinking, well, we throw these big words around, but what does that even mean? What do I understand by that? And what does it look like? So if I'm respecting someone, I'm being mindful of them. I'm considering their needs as an individual. I'm acknowledging their experiences. I'm showing regard for the space that they take up in the world. And I'm recognizing their right to take up that space. And what does justice look like? For me, it comes down to our embodied experiences. We all experience the world with and through a body. And justice for me starts with our bodies having what they need. At a very basic level, this is water, food, and shelter. And beyond this, we need spaces to have families, build communities, create cultures. We need spaces to live, thrive, play, create. And importantly, justice means that our bodies are our own, that we have agency and autonomy, and that where we can, we make choices for ourselves, that our bodies are not violated, controlled, oppressed, or used by others, and that we don't make some bodies more important than others due to their size, shape, color, ability, gender, and of course, species. So then I wanted to explore a little around how we can do more of this, be more respectful, be more just. And I was breaking it into what we can do in our daily lives versus how we can approach activism. And then I thought, actually, no, what if we don't even need to separate those things? What if by applying our anti-speciesist values and embodying them in everything we do with the intention to stimulate social change, then this is in itself activism. We might call it micro-activism, because then doesn't this put activism in the hands of the many rather than a designated few? And couldn't this be empowering for those who don't identify as activists to also ask themselves, what can they do? So maybe we could revise how we see activism so it's not just the obvious and expected things that are currently considered activism. And some say that even living vegan is in itself a form of activism, and I tend to agree. And I believe that micro-activism, not as a substitute but alongside the larger scale efforts, can help to create a real and actual change for real bodies, and I believe can help lay the groundwork to building a more just world for other animals. Because we won't just magically get over there to where we want to be in one big leap. It's going to take lots of stepping stones. And importantly, when big shifts happen, if the foundations aren't laid, what we build will just crumble and those changes won't stick. So if we can sow seeds of change every day to start creating the landscape that we want from where we are and with what we have, I believe that we're doing something really important. And so then I thought, well, how do we relate to other animals in our lives? In what ways are we as humans able to be more respectful and create a more just world for our fellow animals? And simply for me, there are two fundamental relationships that we have with other animals. One is how we interact with them, and the other is how we speak about them. In other words, our language. And by speak, I'm including the written word. So these relationships reflect both our personal and wider cultural attitudes towards other animals. And it might sound obvious, but we need to continually assess our interactions with other animals and whether we can be more just and respectful. And I think it's important, especially as vegan and animal advocates, that we don't think that we've arrived and that's it. It's important that we still practice curiosity and that we bring a massive dose of humility to our relationships with other animals. We are doing our best, but that doesn't mean that we always know what's best. And we have a lot of socialized conditioning to dismantle in ourselves. So for many of us, a lot of interactions are those with other animals who are refugees from the industries of oppression, those we live with in our homes, or who we help care for at sanctuaries. So there are also our space sharing relationships with free living animals in our gardens, in our green spaces, and in wider communities. But each of us is in a very different situation. Yours might be similar or massively different to mine, and every context is different. So it would be impossible to prescribe what each of us could do. And it's also important to remember that the situations we are in are not ideal and we can't do things perfectly. We often have to make difficult decisions and choices, but we just need to do our best in each and every situation. So for me, it's more, as I said, bringing curiosity and humility into each interaction. Some questions I find useful are, what do they need? Do they have their basic needs met? At the very minimum, water, food, shelter. Am I respecting their agency and autonomy in this situation? How can I acknowledge their autonomy more and allow more agency? How can I relinquish my control, my dominance and entitlement? Can I somehow get their consent? Do they appear to be consenting? What might they choose? Can I create opportunities for them to make choices? Is what I'm doing in their best interests? Can I create a space where they can flourish better? Can I help them to express their individuality? Do they have spaces where they can be playful, creative, explorative, be alone for time out if they choose, make friends, develop relationships? And especially for free living beings, am I respecting their space? How can I cohabit more harmoniously in these shared spaces? And can I assist with something that they're struggling with? A few simple examples might be these, and some of these are from just things that I do. These are just simple examples, but we've all got our own things that we can do. But it might be like checking the shower for insects and spiders before you turn on the water in the shower. It might be putting water down in our gardens and green spaces, especially during dry months and droughts. Not approaching dogs to stroke them as if we are entitled to do that with every dog. It might be supervising the cat's garden play so that they get time outdoors, but that they don't kill other free-living individuals. It might be not letting dogs run through ponds in nature reserves to protect the free-living animals whose home that is. Or it might be giving the cats we care for different levels to hang out, or letting the dogs we're walking with decide which direction to take. Being mindful of the light and noise and other disturbances we create in outdoor spaces. And we can encourage others into respectful practices like this as well. Another example is something we can be mindful of at sanctuaries, in that sometimes volunteers are determined to get a selfie with the residents because we feel drawn to them, or we might want to use that picture in our activism. But we have to consider that those individuals might not want us getting in their space and crowding them. I saw an activist at a sanctuary so hell-bent on getting his selfie with a pig resident that he towered over him, he grabbed him, and he ignored the pig's very vocal complaints. And as soon as he could, the pig ran off. So we need to listen and pay attention to what other animals are communicating with us. And speaking of communication, I'd like to move on to our language. See what I did there, dog? Most of us have the opportunity every day to modify our language, to be mindful of the words we choose when speaking about other animals. And I often hear vegans say, the animals don't care what we say about them. So firstly, I'd like to challenge this and say that for me, that's taking a very arrogant attitude of assuming that we can know what other animals are thinking or experiencing, which I strongly advocate against making blanket assumptions like this. But secondly, that's not really the point. Language is how we as humans communicate, and the words we use reflect and reinforce our beliefs and attitudes. And it's our unjust beliefs and attitudes towards other animals that we are trying to change. So language is a very important aspect of bringing about the change we want to see. It's a tool we all have in our toolkit, and so it's the one thing that is accessible and available at all times and in most situations. Even in our everyday conversations, we can challenge speciesist norms by choosing more just and respectful language that doesn't reinforce other animals as inferior, as objects, as commodities. And for a start, not calling other animals it would be a huge shift, even within our own movement. I believe our words can be a form of resistance to injustice and oppression. We're disrupting the norms of oppressive language that's used to hide and normalize violations such as enslavement, coercion, sexual assault, murder, forced breeding. And our language is something that we can keep assessing and evolving all the time. For me, another example is when I'm out with Dylan dog, one thing I get the chance to challenge regularly is that Dylan, and therefore dogs in general, are property. So when people ask, are you Dylan's owner? I say, no, I don't own him. I'm his guardian or his companion. I'll speak about a dog's human rather than saying their owner. I've also recently stopped telling people what breed of dog Dylan is, or commenting on other dogs' breeds to avoid being complicit in perpetuating the oppressive practices of selective breeding. So that's just another thing from my own life. But of course, as I said before, we've all got our own situations and contexts where we can make these small changes. And of course, there are the obvious euphemisms we can challenge, like using flesh rather than so-called meat, skin rather than leather. We can change the metaphors we use. I'm sure we all know the favorite feed two birds with one scone. We can avoid using language that assigns other animals with a designated role, such as dairy cows or racehorses. And we can avoid using other animals pejoratively, like calling someone a bitch, a rat, a snake, and those kind of things. There are some amazing resources to help evaluate our use of language. Joan Danaher has a brilliant book called Animal Equality. It's not that easy to get hold of, and it is quite expensive, but there may be ways around this. And then there's, of course, Jeremy is here, and the Unlearning Speciesist Language group on Facebook is a brilliant resource. And Jeremy's own website, veganinteractions.com, has some excellent resources around language. So I'm so glad Jeremy's here. And something that's also important as a social justice movement is that we use language to ask for what we want. And I don't think I'm alone. In fact, I know I'm not alone in thinking that we are not asking for what we want. If we want respect, justice, and freedom for other animals, then why do we mostly only ask for people to stop being cruel, to stop abusing other animals, or to love them more? This language does not effectively convey the goals of the animal rights movement. What it does convey are the goals of the animal welfare movement. So if we had a framework where there was an acceptance and an acknowledgement of the individual rights of other animals, then this language would be more appropriate. But we are not there yet. I say yet. And so when we ask for the end of cruelty and abuse, there's a massive disconnect. There's an ongoing shift within some modern cultures towards a better welfare for other animals, how they are treated and the conditions that they live in. There's a push towards so-called higher welfare meat and a concern for how humanely other animals are killed. So people are already being socialized to be against cruelty and abuse. And many humans, as we know, consider themselves animal lovers. They keep so-called pets who they love. They might love so-called wildlife. They love watching the birds, love seeing the young lambs in the fields. So we have to understand this is the culture we are in, and in which this language has a culturally understood meaning. Fighting cruelty and abuse and being an animal lover already exists as part of our speciesist cultures. This is not a new concept to people. So then when we come along and talk about cruelty, abuse, and love, they recognize this. They agree with us. They might even think we're on the same page, but of course, we are not on the same page. So the thing is, as vegan animal advocates, we are now seeing the world through different spectacles. We're alienated from the norms of our culture. We understand things differently and can see our socialization for what it is. And as part of that, we develop a new way of understanding the language. So for us, loving another animal also includes respecting their bodies, not paying for them to be murdered or poisoned or sexually assaulted, not consuming them. For us, all use is abuse. And relationships that seek to imprison, enslave, dominate, and control are by their very nature cruel. Yet that is not what non-vegans hear. So there's a disconnect. It doesn't match. So our true message is not heard. We are not asking for what we want. So we either need to help them understand what we mean by cruelty and abuse and love, or maybe more simply and effectively, we choose different language. Language that clearly tells them that we want to bring an end to the use, the breeding, the murder of other animals, that we are advocating for relationships that acknowledge the rights of our fellow animals to have their bodily autonomy, their agency, and their individual needs and desires respected. One final thing I wanted to mention that can help foster more just and respectful attitudes in ourselves and others is to be mindful of not portraying other animals as weak, helpless victims. This misrepresents who they are as individuals and discounts their resistance. It also frames us, the humans, as their saviors, which further disempowers other animals. We need to frame ourselves not as saviors, but as allies and accomplices who stand in solidarity with our fellow earthlings. So we need to be mindful not to always lump everyone together when speaking about other animals. Each individual and every situation and context is different. The experiences of a cow being used for her milk is different to a captive fish in an aqua prison, is different to a mouse in a lab. And a hen used for her eggs is different to a chicken raised for their flesh. And that's not to say that we play oppression Olympics and make some wrongs more wrong than others, but that we acknowledge the diverse experiences of oppressed individuals. And where we can, we need to center our fellow animals as individuals who have likes, dislikes, needs, and desires. They are unique personalities who build complex relationships, who create and value friendships. We need to show that they have moral and emotional lives, that they build communities, and they affect the cultures that shift and change and evolve because of the unique individuals in them. So to conclude, as animal rights advocates, it's important that we do our best to be more just and respectful in our own relationships with other animals, so that we embody our values in everything we say and do. Through the embodiment of our values, we can influence the attitudes of humans towards all the other millions of species we share the earth with. Through our behavior, by being the change we want to see, sowing the seeds, laying the groundwork, taking steps towards a vegan world. And through our language, as we send a clear message that says, we want a world where every body is respected and where there is justice for all bodies. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you, Wendy. Right, so in terms of the Q&A, for people, if you look at reactions on the bottom of your screen, that's where you'll find a raise hand feature, and so you can raise your hand to ask a question, and then I shall try and catch them in order. I don't know whether I will or not. And also remember to unmute yourself as well, because that's often kind of what happens. So I would invite any questions for Wendy.
Don't all speak at once.
Okay, so Jeremy and Nisha's hand is up, so go for it.
We share a hand.
All right, just yeah.
Yeah, really enjoyed that, Wendy. Yeah, several parts of that I could highlight, but I guess just surprise, surprise, bringing it back to language. Something that I know I've been trying to answer for myself. So I'm cheekily trying to get the answer from you because I'm struggling to get one for myself. What happens when we're not on the same page for this, what we would consider to be better language? For instance, I've had street outreach conversations where someone promotes animal use while at the same time saying they respect the fellow animal. And just curious how you might approach that when we've found this language we think is bulletproof, and sometimes all of a sudden someone kind of, dismantles it or just sees it in a different way. How to, when we have different meanings of the word respect, how do we bridge that gap, or how you might approach that?
So have you got a specific example there, Jeremy, of something like a specific word that's been a disconnect or a conversation, a specific part of a conversation, just so I can
maybe
question a bit better?
We could say it's that they're a hunter who respects the individuals who they kill or murder.
Ah, right. Okay. So then I suppose you would go back to, again, like looking, as I said at the beginning of the talk, is to what do we understand by respect? And are we considering them as an individual? Are we considering their bodies? Are we being mindful of their experiences and their right to have their own body? Because I suppose it's with hunters, I suppose they're going to have that argument that, well, other animals hunt other animals. That's often what comes back to us, isn't it? But I think we can always bring it back to, again, our own morality as humans, that we live within our own moral conversations, and we don't kind of replicate the morality lived by other species, for example. But I think it's coming back to getting them to define what respect means for them. I suppose, I think for me, I would definitely ask them to define their own language, and then maybe challenge them on the disconnect of how I see that language, or get them to kind of give examples of what they see as respectful behavior, and then maybe, oh, That's Brian's alarm. Sorry, just to know. And then, yeah, maybe then get them to elaborate, and then maybe you can have more of a conversation about what is respectful, what isn't respectful, and maybe find some common ground within that. I don't know if you would agree with any of that, or.
Yeah, I agree. Getting a baseline from them certainly is a good place to start. I think I remember having a social media conversation once where I think someone said something along those lines, and I said, I hope you don't respect your family, because I'd be fearful for them, you know, what you do to them if that's what you consider respect. But yeah, and Philip raised a good point in the chat. Just, you know, always evaluating language. I mean, bulletproof is a bit of a violent analogy, so trying to move away from things like that. So
Yeah,
good point.
Yeah, no, it's difficult, isn't it? But I think, because I think language, again, it can be, even the language that we think is fairly objective is still subjective, depending on our experiences, our upbringing, how we see the world, our culture, and all of that. There are still going to be elements of disconnect there. I suppose it is trying to find that common ground, and then, yeah, have that conversation from there. So.
And bridging the gap between what their understanding is and ours. And oftentimes simpler language might go further, even though it's not necessarily what we'd like to say, if that makes sense.
I think that's the main thing, is kind of using our conversations as a way to understand each other. Like, if we can understand them, we can get into their shoes, and we can then advocate from a place that they're in, from a place that they understand, rather than trying to preach at them and trying to enforce our knowledge and understanding on them. Is like, get into their world and go, okay, well, if we're in this world, how do you see this, you know, and just maybe take it from there.
Right. Okay. So we have a hand up from Louise and Ronnie. I was expecting Ronnie might pick up on what you said about showers, because he would have to look for insects once a year then. But we shall see.
Well, I have a bath, we haven't got a shower. And what is very disturbing, actually, is a lack of insects. I used to have to always be removing insects and spiders and other small creatures from the bath before I ran the water. And now that is so rare, and that is really concerning, that there are so few insects about. And that's, I think that's a real problem with what's happening to the environment. So I wish there were more insects in the bath for me to remove, to be quite honest, than what we have. But anyway, yeah, my question. I mean, great talk, Wendy, as always. There's just one little thing that concerned me there, and that's when you were talking about just living vegan being a form of activism. Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's really important that that all vegans try to be as active as possible in spreading the vegan message. And I do wonder that when people say that living vegan is a form of activism, whether that kind of gives vegans a cop out from that. They think, well, I'm living vegan, so this is all I need to do. I don't need to kind of get out there and kind of, be actually kind of proactive in spreading the message as much as possible. I just wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie, for your question. And I share your concern of the lack of insects as well. I do wonder also, just on another note, whether it's because you also have cats in your house as well, because I know cats are like such hunters of insects. I know I often have to rescue insects and spiders out of harm's way of the cats in this house, but I just wondered if that had any bearing on your situation. But yeah, I totally share your concern with
I kind of don't think it is. They don't, the cats very rarely, the only time a cat goes in the bathroom really is if they're having to have special food or medication and they go in there to eat separately to the others. So I don't think it's really, and even when we had even more cats than now, there was a time when there were more insects. I don't think we noticed the same outside. We've noticed it with slugs and snails as well. So there's definitely some. I don't know whether other people have noticed the same problem, but definitely and we've got a really wildlife friendly garden. So, and even that doesn't seem to have made a difference, does it?
No, not really. Even to the point where you've got bug houses, but you kind of put a bug house up, but then you kind of say, well, we actually need the bugs to go inside the bug houses.
Nobody moved in.
You know, there's no one moved in, you know.
Yeah.
So you get the spiders and you still get earwigs and wood lice and stuff, but we've really noticed there's been quite a massive difference, like alarmingly so. When you lift up wood, there's nothing there. And we've kind of gone, whoa.
Yeah.
There's something out of balance here.
I don't know whether that's universal. I think it is universal. I mean, it's been reported there's been this massive decline in the number of insects. Whether somebody around here doing something terrible in particular, I don't know. Whether this is other people who experience the same thing, I don't know.
Do I have to put my hand up in another conversation, or can I just say something about what you were saying about the cats and stuff? And we've got a catio on the back, which is like a pen that allows the cats in and out into the garden, but they can't actually get out. And this is another kind of debate which a lot of vegans have problems with regarding letting the cats out into where you'd have they'd have proper freedom, autonomy to do what they want. And we find that we have to control that to some degree, which isn't a natural thing that you would normally do. But because we are trying to protect the wildlife outside in the garden, because it's an animal liberation thing, you're trying to strike that balance so the cats can enjoy being out in the sunny air of the back garden, but they can't actually get out. And I know that that is a major discussion in animal rights as to whether, and we've had lots of kind of arguments over whether that should be allowed. And there's a lot of vegans that don't get when you say, well, it's actually to protect the wildlife that's here. And predation, and it's also another thing, you've got cars and not a natural environment for animals to be in that sense. Certainly cats and road traffic accidents and things like that with them, and all of that combined, and so you have to try and strike a balance. I just wondered what you kind of thought about that in terms of autonomy, letting animals like cats out, and what other people feel about that, because that is something that really engenders quite a lot of anger. In the movement.
And Roger and I actually did our Still Alive show yesterday evening, wasn't it, Roger? We actually covered that topic really quite extensively. So if anyone wants to check it out, it's called Cats and Cars.
So I don't know what you feel about that, Wendy. What in terms of what you were saying?
It's a difficult one. Just if I can just go back to Ronnie's previous.
Yeah.
Otherwise, my brain will go. I'll just start losing the plot, basically. So the previous question on veganism being a form of activism, because funnily enough, when I was thinking about that, I thought about you, Ronnie, and I thought, oh, Ronnie's not going to be happy with that.
He's going to say something.
But I think what I mean is I don't want to in any way say like I'm seeing it as a form of micro activism, like as I was talking about. So it's something that we can do on a very kind of personal level, that is making a declaration, setting an intention for social change. And we're putting that into practice for ourselves, and then we're embodying that, and we maybe inspire other people with how we live, etc. What I'm not saying is that's the only thing that we should ever do. But and as I said in the talk, it's like alongside the bigger efforts and the other activism. So I don't see it as a standalone. I see it as a complementary. But for some people, what I think something that I've realized and what I've come to recognize is that some people are never going to identify as activists. They're just not. And I know quite a few vegans who just don't and will not identify as activists, but they are still doing that, if that makes sense. They still a form of protest and resistance against the status quo and the norms of speciesism in their own right, because they still have to swim against the tide every day. They still have to have difficult conversations and, you know, all the stuff that goes with being a vegan in a non-vegan world. So I do feel like it's a form of protest and resistance, but I'm not saying it's the only thing that we should ever do. And if anyone has the capacity and the resources and the ability to do, you know, more and bigger things, then I definitely encourage that. But I just also want to recognize that some people might never be that person as well. So That's what I would say to that. I don't know if you have any comeback on that, Ronnie, or anyone else has anything to add on that.
I think there are really simple things that it's just everyone thinking, you know, how can I do a bit more? I mean, a very practical example was us today. We unfortunately had to go to the dentist. It was only for a checkup, and in the waiting room, there's another woman in the waiting room, and Louise and I were having a conversation between ourselves, and the word vegan, or somehow this other woman caught on we were vegans and asked us were we vegans? We said yes. And she said, oh, it's something I've been thinking about. And immediately I'm out to the car, getting a booklet about veganism and giving it to this woman. She was very grateful for it. And it's that kind of little thing, you know, I always carry information about veganism around with me. So if there's anyone who expresses interest like that, I give them the information. And that's something that kind of this extra little thing that maybe all vegans could do. That I think is a very simple form of outreach. So it's not just, you know, when I talk about activism, I don't mean like the big activism where you're in the street doing a cube or you're doing a stall at an event or anything like that, but these kind of little additional things that people can be mindful of. This, you know, just going, you know, doing that little extra bit more to spread the message.
Yeah, but and I agree with that, and I think that like the living vegan is part of that, and part of that tapestry of the small things that we are doing. Well, not that living vegan is a small thing, but though you know, the leafleting or anything, or the extra little thing that you just mentioned, I think it's all part of that tapestry. And what I think I'm a little bit more mindful of now is not creating this paradigm where we've got activism and then you're not an activist. It's like you're either an activist or you're not. And if you're only doing leafleting, you're not really an activist because you're just doing leafleting. Because people, I think if you say to most people, visualize an activist, they're going to see someone in the street with a big sign, with a megaphone, you know, protesting outside a company or marching or doing rescue, doing liberations, whatever. Most people are going to bring that into their head. And I think that can be a little bit disempowering as well. Yeah. To individuals. I think it can be right, well, I'm not that person. I don't have that personality. I'm not going to do that. And I think if we can empower people to see the small things they do, like you just said, so I think we're actually on the same page in that way, the small things they can do is a form of activism, micro-activism, then that might empower people to think, well, actually, what more can I do then? Because I don't have to go and stand out on the street with a megaphone. I can do this. I can just hand this over to someone. I can just talk about what I just, you know, that I just went to a sanctuary yesterday and the individuals that I met there, and I can have these conversations. I think it might be more empowering if we don't have this binary of you're an activist or you're not. And if you're a vegan and you don't do other activism, then you're just a vegan. It's like, I think there's a spectrum, and I think I would like to empower people more to be able to do the bits that they can with their personality and their resources and capacities. That's, I think, where I'm at now. And then going back to the cat thing, this is a very difficult one, isn't it? And I think someone mentioned in the chat there overlapping rights, and it's so true. And I think especially with people like cats, you know, we have created a very difficult situation for the free living animals who are living around. And I've done volunteering with London Wildlife Protection. And I used to find small birds or injured birds, and I'd say to them, I'm not supposed to really take this bird, am I? Because the mum might come back looking for them and they might just abandon them. And they used to say, well, in an ideal world, yes, that's true, but this is not an ideal world, because that bird is just going to have an unlimited amount of predators around, because so many people are now living with, let's to use David Nybert's domesticated cats in their homes. And so it's an unnatural situation for the birds, for the mice, for the rats, for whoever. And so this is not an ideal situation. It's not a vegan world that we would, you know, create a much better situation. So I think while ever we are in these difficult situations, we do have to, like Louise was saying, create some kind of balance or find some kind of harmony and just continually assess that situation and try to allow as much autonomy and agency in the other animals that we care for, but also whilst considering the rights of the other animals to not be completely, you know, just overwhelmed by predators that we have introduced into their world, into their homes. And I think this is a conversation that, that it's difficult, and I don't imagine there's a right or wrong answer. It's just trying to find our way and do our best in that situation.
Right, people, we've got about quarter of an hour, 20 minutes to go. I don't see any more hands, but Dennis, you're unmuted, so I'm assuming you're trying to jump the queue, so go ahead.
I don't want to jump the queue.
Go on, Dennis, with an N. You're allowed to jump the queue.
Thank you for a great talk. I really enjoyed it, and it's brought the conversation to a place where I needed to be, or we needed to be, really, for every webinar, and that's to find a strategy to get the message across. We've reiterated our position more often than not. We've spent a year and a half doing that. Animal rights, that's where we're at, but now we need to work out how to get the message out. So I like the idea of the micro activism, and maybe put together a list of 5, 10 or 20 things, or 20 plus things an individual could do in their daily life quietly. I think that would be helpful. But also I would like to know what strategies for a group like us might work. What would you suggest, or what would the assembled company suggest? I'd like to throw that open. Strategies for a group. So thank you.
Thank you for your words of encouragement there, Dennis, with one N. But I would love to throw that open, because I'd love to hear, for there's some brilliant people in here that I'd love to hear from. If you've got any contributions and answering Dennis's question, I'd really love, to throw that open as well.
If I just add another little bit here as well, we had an invitation. We had an offer. I think it was from Philip. If you're here, Philip Murphy, to write. Thank you. To write something for the page for Sentient Rights Ireland. We have taken some of the articles that were in on social media and put them into our website, where they're more of a permanent fixture. So for everybody here, I would welcome articles sent in to us on any aspect of animal rights, and we can take it from there then. And of course, the copyright to the work will always remain yours, but we would see it as furthering the cause for animal rights. So thank you.
Okay, so do we have any more? Philip, go ahead.
Thank you. Wendy, thanks for another great talk. Wonderful. I really appreciated what you brought to the group today, and what an amazing group of activists here today. Grateful to be sharing the space with you all. I guess, and I'm looking at Ronnie and his t-shirt, thinking about the things that I do come right top of mind, kind of micro activism, going out every day. It's a rare moment if I leave the house without either a t-shirt or a hat on that says is a subject, the content is oriented towards veganism, animal rights. Very simple, and just something I do always, basically, with very, very few exceptions when, circumstances dictate going to something that requires more formal dress or what have you. But that's just off the top of my head.
Okay, now, Ronnie, you've got your hand up again, or is that from the last time?
No, it's a new hand. A fresh hand.
Oh, that's handy. Go on then.
Roger, you've got your hand up, which is even more funny.
Because I've already said stuff. So
I just want to say thank you to Philip for that comment as well. And I think that's always a great idea, is to wear t-shirts, wear hats, wear slogans, and whatever. I know a lot of us here do that as well. So thanks for that, Philip, and thanks for your offer to Dennis to write that article. I can't wait to read that.
And a follow-up to Dennis's point, which about what people can do. Ronnie and I went through 50 activist ideas, which weren't, the kind of usual things that you were talking about, cubes and all the big kind of set piece things, the kind of ordinary things that you could do. We went through 50. Some of them were rather weird, as Ronnie will confirm, but we then ended up with a top 10. So there is one video where all the 10 are pretty good. And so, Dennis, that might be something that might be of use to point people towards, perhaps. So, Wendy, my questions about language, you'll be incredibly surprised to find. I was really interested in what you were saying, and thank you for talking about the problematics of using cruelty language and abuse and these kind of words. Now, it's not in the modern day, it's not that they exist, those words. It's the fact that in the modern vegan world, they seem to be the only ones that exist. So, cruelty is the dominant word now, which is closely followed by animal abuse. And so it doesn't really move us towards an animal rights position about rights violations and use and everything. And then more disturbing for me, and this is what I'd like you to comment on, is that in North America now, we've got a lot of people probably building on this kind of animal lover type construction, calling all other animals, regardless of age, babies. And we're here for the babies, that they're saying. And I just wondered whether, is this more sliding away from animal rights to something else, or what? Just a process? What do you think?
I've seen this as well, and I think, and I know in the past I've been guilty of calling other animals fur babies and things like that. Something I don't do now. I've really shifted away from that, and that's another thing that I think is important, is that we do continually reassess our language and evaluate and evolve. Like what we say today, we might completely change our mind next week and think, actually, I don't really like what I'm saying now anymore, and be ready to and open to evolve that. And I've seen this a lot in the movement, talking about babies, and even vegans talking about fur babies. And I think sometimes when people are doing outreach or the protest slogans and things like that, I wonder if people are using the term babies because they feel it's a more emotive slogan, because it's going to get people's attention, it's going to get non-vegans attention, because it's like you're basically killing, murdering babies. And I think even in the human context, like humans are more emotionally moved by the death of babies and children and things like that. So I wonder if that's a bit of a strategy. And of course, in some cases, it's true, we are killing really young animals because they've been, like the chickens that are raised and they're literally weeks old when they're fully grown, and they literally are babies that are fully grown and things like that. So in some cases it's accurate, but I don't feel that it's useful in terms of, I think it is, if we just do a blanket statement that we're killing babies, because one, it's not always accurate, and also I think it kind of discounts a little bit the other animals that are in these oppressive situations that are not babies. Some other animals might be old or older, and many of them are adults. A lot of them might be older, or there might be other animals who are really old who are living in captured and enslaved in zoos, for example, things like that. So I think it can discount if we only are concerned by the oppression of so-called young animals and babies. So I don't think that's helpful. But I just wonder if it's a bit of a strategy, as I said, to like trigger people's emotions a little bit more. And I think we should definitely move away from calling other animals babies. And I used to say infantilize, until Ayana Goodfellow said that actually infantilize is also a problem for young humans, because it can be very dismissive, very ageist and things like that. So I just think we can be very dismissive of other animals and their individuality and their capacity and their everything that they are, by just dismissing them as babies. So I personally don't like this and would like to move away from it.
Yes, indeed. So Ronnie, second hand. You're muted.
Ronnie's on mute. Should we just not tell him?
No. Yeah, that was a better question, that one, than the first one. We can't hear it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Louis said I was threadbare, so yeah, I mean that's
Second-hand.
second-hand. I was saying, yeah,
He's
thrift shop.
Thrift
That's
shop.
where she got me. Yeah, it's going back to what Dennis said about the ideas, and obviously ideas for what everyone can do in their everyday life to spread veganism would be great. And as Roger said, we covered a few of those in that in the kind of video discussion we had on those 10 best points from the Animal Justice Academy it was. But in terms of like the kind of the more organized activism, I think where that's and we kind of need that everywhere. At the moment it tends to happen mainly in the center of big cities, Cuba Truth and We the Free, people like that. It tends to be in the center of big cities. We kind of we sort of need that everywhere in all communities. And I think where that occurs, it's usually because there's there's like a very small group of people, or very often one person who acts as an instigator to that. And I think one really important thing that Sentient Rights Ireland could try to do is to find those instigators try to find instigators in the various towns and cities throughout Ireland, people in those areas that are prepared to instigate vegan outreach in those areas, to encourage other vegans in those areas to get involved and to do, because there's really a small group of people to do. I mean, I do a lot of information stores just on my own or with one or two other people. You don't necessarily need like big numbers of people to spread the message. And so I think
Ronnie, could I just jump in as I normally do on our show? I think it's important to say that Sentient Rights Ireland is a political party and not a social movement organization. So
right, yes,
I don't know whether Dennis would say that creates a difference. I tend to think it does, but it's not as though it's just an outreach group in the sense, right?
Right. Okay.
Just to add that, Roger, about Sentient Rights Ireland being a political party, we are indeed, and we're trying to get registered to contest elections. But our approach to politics is not the same as another political party of, say, the left or the right. We see it as a vehicle. We could have been a social justice movement. We could have been a radical grassroots movement. We did talk about that at our first meeting. What were we going to set up and we decided to use politics as the platform. That's why we're sticking with that and with animal rights. So that's just to clarify our position, where we're at.
Can I say something?
I think Louise wants to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, not on Dennis's thing, but on something that I was just going to say to I've only forgotten Wendy's name. Wendy. I was just going to say about the language of when I saw your speech in London, I thought it was incredible, to be honest, because I thought it was a really brave thing that you did, which was actually saying about words and what they actually mean, and for us to be more educated in them. And it's definitely made me think in some of the actions that, I've got one coming up, and using the words of justice, respect and liberation, and human supremacism, and those words, like when I was in court, I used the word human supremacism to do with the action at Sequani, and getting the court to understand exactly what I meant and why I did what I did from an animal liberation point of view. And there were people in the court that were listening, and in fact there was one guy that came out that was an usher, and he was actually really sympathetic with what had been said. And I really do think you're right. I don't think attention is paid to what we actually do say. Like when you said about fur babies, I hear so many people using that word, and yet they're not our fur babies. They've got their own parents. We're not their parents. So why would we be using those words? And I think you're absolutely right. So I just want to say, really, I think you were fantastic for saying it when it needed to be said, for us to all, because veganism is about an evolution in your own self as well. You know, you learn all the time about yourself and the words that you're using. You never stop learning. And so I just wanted to say thanks for that. And yeah, it's definitely made me think about using different words and listen to what I'm actually saying, which is a lot of the time I just sort of waffle or talk a lot.
No, you don't.
Do you know what I mean? You know.
Oh, Louise. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that, because I think yeah, it does need to be said, and you said it, and it's made me think.
You. No, I really appreciate you saying that, Louise. Thank you so much, and I'm really glad that it's made you think as well, because that's of course the point of the things that we do, isn't it? When we advocate, we can influence each other. And same as you, I constantly look at myself every day, and I catch myself all the time saying stuff and think, oh, why have I said that? That's terrible. Like, no, don't say that again. And constantly looking at what I'm saying, how I'm talking about other animals, the things I might be doing, and it is a continuous thing. And I think that's really important, that we don't get to become vegan and then just go, that's it, and I'm perfect now, and everyone else is inferior to me, and I'm, you know, doing so well. And I think we are doing well, but it's just we can always improve and expand and grow in what we're doing, and have a ripple effect, and then influence other people. So I thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that as well. And well done for what you said in court as well. Like, that's brilliant.
Yeah, that's great. We're coming towards the end, and I'm a bit concerned that this is dissolving into a bit of a love-in. So is anybody going to say that Wendy doesn't know what she's talking about, and really challenge her, or more seriously, maybe we could have a final question from someone, if anyone's got one. If you have, you can just unmute yourself. And Nella.
Yes, amazing talk, Wendy. Really interesting. You mentioned everything. I had a question about the way we think about other animals, not only the way we talk about them. I feel that even when we have like the best intentions, sometimes we cannot get rid of our anthropocentric way of thinking. And recently, I found myself in a situation that I was involved with other animals, and I was interpreting their behavior completely wrong, because I was seeing everything through my human lens, and I was projecting my own needs and my own fears on these other animals that belong on a different species and had not completely different needs. We all have the same basic needs, as you mentioned, food, shelter, etc. But we have other needs that are completely different. So sometimes I find it challenging to draw the line between the things that are common, the needs that are common, and the needs that are completely different, and to fill that gap, the gap of lack of knowledge, because there are like 1,000 species, and we come into contact with so many, especially free living beings. And maybe we know enough things about dogs and cats, or other species that are close to us. I don't know, pigeons maybe, but the other species that we affect and we see in everyday life that we know almost nothing about. So what are your thoughts on that, on the anthropocentric lens, and how could we get rid of that, if it is even possible?
Yeah, no, thanks. No, that's such a great question as well, and something that, as you know, I battle with as well, with on a daily basis, with my own thoughts and interactions with other animals. And again, it's just a very, very difficult question, isn't it? And I think, yeah, that we tend to learn a lot about, like you say, dogs and cats and other animals that have been heavily studied, researched, and even that brings up its own challenges or an own problematic issues, as how do we study these other animals? Like, do we study them in, you know, on natural situations, or are we studying them in their natural environments? And then even in their natural environments, are we disturbing them? Are we creating some kind of unnatural situation for them because we're there watching them? All these things come to mind. But yet there's that paradox of, if we don't know enough about them, we're not going to be able to know how we respect their spaces or tend to their needs or even understand what their needs might be. And yet we might be kind of imposing ourselves on them and their spaces if we do try and understand more. So there's that constant paradox. And I think for me at the moment, what I'm trying to do is I read a lot. And I know you and I both attend Vine Book Club, where we read a lot of books about just such a diverse range of themes and topics to do with other animals, to do with justice, to do with speciesism, to do with other forms of oppression. And I think for me, I just try to expand my own knowledge as much as I can and practice that in a way that I feel is just and respectful. So I try to go to books that I know have been written by people who have been mindful of the kind of things that we just spoken about. Like I'm just listening at the moment to one called The Creative Lives of Other Animals. And the author, who actually came onto the book club as well, was speaking about how she was very mindful of reading literature that wasn't based on very intrusive research on other animals, and how she was very mindful of the research she did herself, and then also the research that she was citing in her book. Because I think that's something that comes up for any of us who read. We will read books and then suddenly you get hit by the horror of, oh, this research was done on other animals to find out this, and you're suddenly faced with this whole, oh my God, they're talking about this horrendous, vivisection or so-called testing, so-called research, and you don't really want to hear about it, and yet you still want to know the information that they found. So it's a very, very complex situation. But I do try and do that in a mindful way and seek out knowledge, seek out books, seek out people who are, researching, scientists who are doing sort of very mindfully more respectful stuff. And then other times, you might actually read a book that is still informative, even though it's not been researched in what you would consider a respectful way. But I think, expanding our knowledge, and then I think just having that awareness, the fact that you're even questioning your own anthropocentrism is in itself just something that's just really important to be aware of all the time, that we are looking at the world through our own human lens, and we can't ever really take that away. But just to try and step back, to maybe listen to what other animals are telling us as well, observe them. Are they communicating with us, And then if we don't know, maybe there are other experts out there who have spent a lot more time with these other animals, who have more experience of them, more knowledge of them, more understanding of how they behave. So maybe we can seek out other experts and their advice and their guidance, because as I said right in the beginning, we don't always know what's best. We have to have humility and curiosity around this. And I think if we can have the awareness of our anthropocentrism, seek out respectful research, seek out expert guidance, and just keep looking at every situation and context, and just keep doing our best. And just be humble, just humility all the time, and listen.
Well, speaking of the best, you're the best, Wendy, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending, everyone who asked some questions, and of course, mainly Wendy McGovern for a wonderful talk and fielding these critical questions so well. So we're just over the hour, so I think it's time to end. So I'll finish the recording. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye for now.